So I posed a question on Monday to Pigskin Pete, and obviously because I used proper English, he didn't understand what I was saying. The ACC was releasing their schedule on January 30th. Logan, I contend that if the ACC had any intelligence, they would make Florida State and Clemson earlier in the season, because with both teams being arguably best in the conference, both teams likely to start next season ranked in the top 10, if the ACC wants any chance at all of having two teams possibly make the playoff, which is a stretch. Now, mind you, we have LSU on the schedule. We have Florida on the schedule. We have NC State. We have a decent schedule when it comes to strength of schedule. Clemson has Notre Dame. They have NC State. They have Miami as well. So they have a decent schedule as well. I think you have to play that game earlier in the season by the last week of September at the latest, so that the loser of that game has a chance to bounce back in the final 2 months of the season. What say you?
It's an interesting idea. I mean, but the biggest question is the ACC smart enough to do that? I mean, that's probably the biggest one there. I don't know. I think it would be interesting. If you look at it, Florida State and Clemson could play a potential 3 times. Definitely, there's a strong possibility it will be 2 with the new divisions. Those will be gone, and it's going to be your top 2 teams in the ACC championship. So there's a good chance that we'll see Florida State versus Clemson twice in 2023, and maybe a 3rd time if things get crazy with playoff stuff. But Florida State, I wouldn't mind it too much, but I am used to that October-ish Florida State versus Clemson kind of mid-October game schedule. I don't know if the ACC would make that move, if that's something of interest to them. If they would want to shake that up. I mean, now that the divisions are gone, I don't think you have to go back to your old ways of how you were scheduling some of these games out. But I also don't want that to affect Florida State and Miami and what they do there, because that needs to be later in the season. I don't want that to be rushed and early. So it really depends on the outlook there. But it's an interesting idea if ACC would want to do that, because I think they learned this last season that, the ACC had some potential with some teams and then fell off, and then you'd have a rise there in Louisville would hang on for a little bit. And you have Drake May with North Carolina, and he's supposed to have a big season next year, coming out as a freshman like the way that he did. So there's a lot of different things that they're going to have to put together schedule-wise with a new realm of no divisions. But we'll see if they would like to do something like that where it's earlier in the season, because that is their biggest matchup of the year.
To me, the biggest 4 games that involve ACC teams this season are Florida State and Clemson. Florida State LSU, which is already scheduled for Sunday, September 3rd, week 1 of the season in Orlando. Clemson plays Notre Dame, which has already been scheduled for November 4th in Clemson. And then Clemson, Florida State, and Florida State, Miami. To me, those are the 4 games. So to me, it comes out where if the ACC was smart, you got Florida State and LSU to open the season. You've got Florida State and Clemson maybe at the last week of September. Have Florida State and Miami play in the middle of October, maybe, the 3rd weekend of October, just to get them a break. And then you got Notre Dame, Clemson to start November. That way it would play out. That way you've got a good game every couple of weeks in the ACC at that point. You're not overloading. You're not killing the team. Give the loser of that Clemson-Florida State game a chance to survive. Because let's say we lose to Clemson for 8th straight time. We still have Miami later in the season. You still have Florida at the end of the year. You still have games that you can use to get that strength schedule back up. If Clemson loses to us, they'll still have NC State. They'll still have Notre Dame. They still will have some games to get their standing back up. That's just the way I feel about it. Of course, I'm the one who thinks we get the hell out of the ACC, but that's just me.
Well, so everything that you stated there, I completely agree with, but I don't want to agree with it, and this is what I mean. I'm a resume guy. Therefore, regardless of when the game's played, it's just another data point among the 12 or 13 data points. So to me, the resume should be evaluated as the resume. And whether Florida State and Clemson play week 1, week 7, the last week of the season, a la Ohio State, Michigan, Ohio State loses, still goes to the playoff, that it should still be just judged as a resume, and the wins and the losses are the same regardless of when they're played. However, what you state is actual reality, that there are people out there and there are people on the playoff committee that judge the teams as they see the momentum of the season going. And therefore, if you lose in week 4 or week 5, and then you have a strong stretch run after that, they evaluate the team as such, as, okay, that is what it is, and it's on the record. But Florida State then won 6 straight after the field goal loss to Clemson. Therefore, they have proven themselves and bounced back. And so it is a real thing. There's no question about that. That's the way many people evaluate these teams.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think that's what I was thinking of, Mark. Some voters in that room will sometimes forget what happens early on after week 3. Definitely if it's a week 2 game or something like that, and then boom, a team goes on a run and they get distracted by that, and they start putting them up in the polls, and it goes increased. I feel like I've seen that year after year after year. It just depends on the voters and that, and if they want to keep it that way before the extension of the playoffs. But I don't know. I don't know if that would deeply affect anything. If it's a game of that magnitude between Florida State and Clemson, it might. It would come down to the very end, but that's why you would have an ACC championship, though, which why I'm thinking would be Florida State versus Clemson going into this next season. I think that's the projection I think everybody has at the moment.
Touch a little bit on what Mark said, though. But if you look at, yes, Michigan Ohio State is the example of the I would say the that happens every year in the month of November. For the most part, and there are some exceptions to the rule. Florida and Georgia tend to be the first weekend of November. There'll be an occasional week like Notre Dame and Clemson this year playing the first week of November, and they did last year. But for the most part, the big games in most big conferences, most Power 5 conferences, put their bigger games end of September, beginning of October, mid-October, the latest, to give those teams the chance. The AC did this in 2014. Florida State and Clemson, I believe, played the third or fourth week of September for that very purpose. Off a national title. Clemson was a team that people had a potential. It was the first year of the playoff. They thought, okay, let's play this game early to give these teams a chance. Florida State ended up going to the season and making the inaugural playoff. So I'm just saying, I agree with what Champ Stein is saying. It should not matter. I agree. It should not matter, if the game is played on November 11th or if the game is played on September 23rd. But the fact of the matter is it does matter. And teams are going to look. And with that schedule later on in the season, if you've got a Clemson in September, Miami in October, Florida in November, you have at least some game, some statement game each month. LSU the first week of the season. You've got a decent resume at that point to where if you're 11-1 or 11-2, come playoff time, you have an argument. I'm not saying you did, but you have an argument.